Welcome to Cut to It, a nursing podcast from two OR nurses and friends and colleagues who are going to bring you best evidence practice and some stories, I hope, that will make it highlight what you might be able to do a little differently in your organization. This is episode 2, Safety is a Team Sport, Speaking Up in the OR. I am Dr. Rosemary Babo. I am an OR nurse and medical affairs global clinical education specialist. Over to you, Marianne.
I'm Marianne Sanford, registered nurse, also operating nurse, and we really want to thank you for joining our podcast today. We appreciate you.
All right, so let's get into it. How comfortable are you speaking up in the OR?
Yeah, it's a very challenging thing for some people, just on a personality basis and not liking conflict and avoiding it. But as we've learned in our own practice and in speaking to many operating room nurses and staff all across the United States over the years, we understand that this is a big problem. It's sort of become a bigger problem over the last few years. There's a lot in the literature about that, and we'll provide links to literature for you at the end of the podcast and have links to it. So it has become a larger problem. A lot of the reasons are unknown, but it is there.
Well, I think they're finding out the reasons actually, and I think a lot of it has to do with not necessarily personality, because I think a lot of OR nurses are a certain type of personality that get into that field. I think it's a practical situation, how comfortable they are. And actually, the literature has identified areas that people are very uncomfortable with. One is any of the anesthesia techniques that they're going to use. Also, positioning issues, anything that might come up that is a complication. How are they going to handle it when they have all these other things going on? And they may not feel comfortable speaking up and saying, oh, I see you're working on the wrong site or headed to the wrong site, when they have all these other things going on. And I'm just going to say this right now. I can't believe that we are still having wrong site surgeries or retained foreign objects.
It is difficult to understand. The ability to speak up is critical. When we're talking about patient safety, we're also talking about, your own, as an OR nurse, your own license and protecting that. But patient safety is paramount. And when you think about it and you frame it in that regard, it's really critical to, if you're not comfortable with it, to learn the skills of speaking up. There's a way to do it that's not necessarily confrontational, and there's a way to do it to collaborate with the rest of the team and speak up as is necessary, again, for that patient safety aspect.
Well, some of the literature that we've become aware of that has been published within the last 5 years, that it's, and I'll go back to where it's not necessarily personality. They found it's the leadership. And there are several components to that we're going to talk about, I think, because you can have a leader and you can speak up, but then what happens? What happens afterwards?
Right. And that's a really key point. There's mentoring. We talk about mentoring all the time in the operating room, and mentoring is not necessarily peer-to-peer. Sometimes it's been between the disciplinary specialties, right? Like your scrub techs and others, your anesthesia personnel, and of course, clearly the surgeon. But having the ability to speak up is great, but you need the secondary help through a mentor if you're not comfortable with it. And when you see that mentoring behavior of speaking up in an elegant and non-confrontational way, you learn from that. And so the literature talks about how the support of mentoring is really critical for everyone to understand and learn how to speak up. Because when you're new to the operating room, when you're like a baby OR nurse, a lot of times you're thinking, like I did, this is how I would think as a baby OR nurse, Bovie suction fluids. Like you're not thinking about, I have to speak up, right? We do have a checklist now. We have a timeout in the operating room. And interesting fun fact, checklists, to some degree, originated in World War II with the pilots flying this big bomber called the B-17. It was just one of the most complicated things to fly at that time. And so they developed checklists so that they can make sure before they took off, they had everything in place to make sure, hey, we're good to go. So that's the origin of the one of the origins of the timeout and the checklist. But the mentoring part is just as important so that we can help people who are new or uncomfortable speak up. And I encourage all mentors to do that, to educate your staff.
And you bring up a really good point. It doesn't have to be just another nurse that you've been assigned to. There's preceptors, there's mentors, there's champions in the OR, there's residency programs, and those all have very valid places and help retain nurses. But it brings to mind when you're talking about surgeons and how they can really make a difference. And I know you've told me a story that I would ask that you share, because you had a unique situation where your previous work helped with a situation as a new nurse somewhere else. And I think it really highlights our point that it's safety is a team sport. Okay, everybody should be involved in this. So Marianne, let's tell our listeners and viewers that story, because I think it really shows how we can all work together.
Right, and this was a matter of safety in the operating room. I worked at a facility in northern New Jersey, but I had transferred to a facility out west, out in the Midwest. And I worked in neurosurgery. That was my primary specialty, and worked with a neurosurgeon that would absolutely not give information prior to the case. And in particular, would not give information regarding what kind of brain surgery it was. It was either an aneurysm or a tumor, typically, and he would not explain what we were doing, wouldn't tell the OR for scheduling purposes. It was just not addressed. And so he would come in to put up the films on the view box and lean back and say, wow, this is a really interesting tumor. And then everyone would run around and scramble to get the instrumentation together because it was a little different between the two. So things weren't prepared. And when you think about that, if the team isn't prepared and is scrambling, that could be a patient safety issue if we don't have what's needed or it's incorrect. That really bothered me. So what I did, I started putting the films up on the view box, and I could tell by the two different the different types of imaging and things what we were doing. And the surgeon came in one day and the staff was upset that I was doing that, and the surgeon predictably was upset I was doing that also, and asked why I did that. And I said, because I don't like running around when I'm trying to be as prepared for your case and your patient as possible. And my reward for speaking up was
Yeah, how'd that go over?
my reward for that speaking up was to be quizzed on the structures of the brain in that particular, before that case started. Mercifully, I got it all right. And the reason I got it right is because the facility I came from, the neurosurgeons stressed making sure everyone was prepared for the situation at hand and even emergent situations. And they did that by having a collaborative discussion with the team. Prior to us even seeing the patient, we would have that conversation. And they also would bring us over to the view box and explain what we were doing and the approach into the brain and why. And it was very astute of them and very, very good for them to get the team prepared. So you weren't guessing and you were ready to go when that patient came in the room and you were ready to start your count. So I always applauded them for that collaboration, which clearly saved me from a disaster when I was being quizzed in the operating room.
Sure.
And I might mention, the management was not supportive in that situation. He of course went to management and complained, and management spoke to me about it, and they were not supportive. They were supportive of the surgeon and the way he liked to do it. And I felt defeated. I felt defeated with him. I did not feel defeated to continue to speak up in the operating room. But management is a huge component of supporting the speaking up.
Well, and thank you for sharing that, because it does take a lot to stand up and try to do. You tried to do numerous things in that one scenario. One, elicit change for the betterment of the patient. And we know that anytime people are confronted with a change, that's a problem. There's also the issue of a personality. Here's a guy who his whole joy, if you will, in doing the craniectomies or whatever he was doing. He liked to play a game. That was his shtick. That's the way he wanted to do things. He's probably pulling in a decent revenue volume when he has OR time, and people just don't want to deal with that. But that doesn't mean that it should not be looked at from. I do think really where um, all the studies have shown that if you have a leader that looks at it, and it doesn't mean that, to your point, they don't have to confront the doctor, but they do have to say, as nursing, this is how we need to set up for your case. This, with the patient, like you said, it involves the patient's safety. So his little fun game, and they allowed it to continue. That doesn't mean that that was the right way to do things, and we all know that. Even though it's something's being done, doesn't mean it's the right way to do it. But I really applaud the leadership I've seen just across the country. I used to travel nationwide for work, and I would have the ability to go into IDNs as well as ambulatory and sometimes even physicians' offices. And I can see the work that is really fabulous, that nurse residencies, Peri-Op 101, and we'll do a whole episode on this because I feel so strongly about this. Not your example is one, and I have plenty of my own. I've had great, surgeons that every case they want to talk about what they're doing, and at some point you're like, but it makes a difference though, and it helps you learn, and it helps you be a better not only caring for the patient, because as they're talking, like as they see things that might be wrong or an anomaly in your patient's body, it gives you compassion. Oh yeah, this is different. Everybody's body is different, and we do need to pay attention. It's not just a routine case after case, and this is something that I think will help our patients stay safe, is when every member is truly engaged. And I've seen a lot of great programs across the nation that are really helping create, well, not only addressing turnover in OR because it is high, but they are helping us be better nurses. And there was a period in there that people weren't getting the clinicals because of the restraints, that the shutdowns, and even now it's sometimes hard getting clinicals. So it's important that we go back to the basics, and you really look at the patient as a patient, not just, this is the limb that we're doing or this is that. So anyway, off my soapbox, but thank you for sharing that story. I think it was very brave of you, and I do think that people will learn from this podcast, that and you know what, Marianne, bring up one of the studies you brought to my attention about Norway and how nursing leadership, what happens when you don't have a positive result.
Yeah, there was a study out of Norway that interviewed clinicians. It was surgeons, anesthesia personnel, OR nurses, OR scrub, and other ancillary people. And what it talked about was, what their perception was of speaking up. What did they feel was important, how they felt about actually speaking up. And one of the things that came out of that actually was that people linked experience to situational awareness. And that was something we were talking about earlier about mentoring, so that they felt that mentoring was really important for them to learn when it's appropriate, how to do it. I mean, there's a very big difference that was discussed in the study, even about the way you're addressing the problem. So it was very important to speak up, but it also is important for the peers to speak amongst themselves. So when there is an adverse event in the operating room, to have that peer-to-peer conversation in whatever that might be, in the surgeons meetings, etc. One of the things also that was discussed in the study was it's very important to have a debrief. And the debrief shouldn't be with just the people in the room itself. It should be between all of the personnel within the operating room. So it becomes a learning experience. And whether that, and the participants in the study felt it isn't enough to just have it one off, like after an event has occurred, but to make safety and speaking up part of the conversation, whether it's at the morning meeting or the monthly meeting, or in addition to when it occurs. So the participants in the study felt that experience really helped, mentoring really helped, supportive leadership really helped, but having that conversation about what happened and how to fix it, because a lot of times they make a report and it just goes into a black hole. So having all of those components, the people in the Norway study really felt that helped them be safer in the operating room.
I would have to agree
Yeah,
for sure.
yeah, indeed.
Well, thank you so much for your perspective and sharing that story. And thank you for tuning in and listening to this podcast or viewing this podcast. And like, subscribe, and also send us email at cuttoitpodcast@gmail.com. And we would be super happy to take on any topics that you are just, in need of help with.
Yes, and it's time to say, hey, it's time for the count. So we'll see you next time on Cut to It.